We want to go right now live to Governor
Super
Charlie
Bowl
Baker.
Championship and MVP award. I, like many people here in New England, I rooted for him all the way through the playoffs, and it couldn't happen to a guy who's done more for us than he did. And I think it's wonderful that once again people have had a chance to appreciate what we've known all along, which is he really is the GOAT. Now I'm here today with Lieutenant Governor Polito and with U.S. House and Ways and Means Chairman Richie Neal, who in many respects has been the GOAT for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts over the course of the past several years as we've worked our way through this pandemic. Time and time again, as we've been working through so many issues that were unanticipated and came with this virus, our office would reach out to his and engage in a conversation and a discussion about what we were worried about and how the federal government might be able to help us as a Commonwealth deal with the myriad of issues that came with this, the economic collapse, the PPE issues, the testing issues, the hospital and long-term care facility financial issues, so many things that came up, one after another, as we worked through the first 10 months of this very difficult ordeal. And I just want to start by saying that the chairman was never more than a phone call away. You never had to call him more than once if you wanted to talk to him about something that was important to the Commonwealth. And I know I speak for the Lieutenant Governor, for myself, and for everybody on our team when we say how much his organization, his office, and he in particular have meant to our efforts here in the Commonwealth of Mass. And we're pleased to be here today to talk about the need for the feds to continue to support state responses and state efforts to work through the pandemic and to prepare for and support the recovery that will desperately need to come after it. And before I get into a few more details on this, I do want to give a quick update on our COVID-19 data. Yesterday, the Department of Public Health reported 3,000 new COVID cases on 113,000 tests. Over 14.3 million tests have been reported in total here in the Commonwealth. 1,389 individuals are in the hospital being treated for COVID. That number, as you all know, is down dramatically since January 4th, which was the peak, and 318 are in the ICU. On vaccines, as of the end of the day Sunday, 859,118 doses have been administered, and over 1.25 million doses have been shipped to providers here in the Commonwealth. COVID-19 has impacted nearly every aspect of life and created substantial challenges for the state, for local government, and for all of us, both here in Massachusetts and across the country. Our economy and the jobs and the purpose that come with it have been significantly impacted by the pandemic. And we've worked hard over the course of the past 10 months to balance the needs of keeping our economy open safely while responding to the pandemic. But there are still substantial financial challenges that we face as a Commonwealth and that other states across the country are facing as well. And it would be critical from our point of view for Congress to pass significant relief swiftly to help us beat down the pandemic and, just as importantly, help get our economy back on track. Here in Massachusetts, our economy was powering forward last February, but COVID brought everything to a grinding halt. Through the work that was done by Lieutenant Governor Polito and others in our business community, we collaborated with public health experts to safely and carefully reopen our economy. And while hundreds of thousands of residents have returned to work over the past few months, there are still way too many people out of work through no fault of their own. The Commonwealth is still down 330,000 jobs from this time last year. We're now in a much better economic spot than we were last spring, but many of our residents are still unable to find a job, and our main streets are hurting, and many small businesses have not recovered from the pandemic and won't for months. Many of the jobs that are lost are going to be very difficult to bring back because they're in industries whose operations have been significantly challenged by the pandemic and will be in the months ahead, including the hospitality, indoor entertainment sectors, and many of the other folks who operate in businesses that were based on what I would describe as the benefit of the crowd. Our state finances are also feeling the burden of COVID-19. Tax revenues have fallen significantly since the start of the crisis, and they remain unpredictable. I think this past year was the first time the Commonwealth ever went 6 months before we in the legislature finally managed to figure out what we thought revenue would look like for the rest of this fiscal year and work together to pass a budget. But that recently released fiscal plan for fiscal 22, which we just filed, is built on a projection that is down $1 billion from the original prediction that we had for fiscal 21 at the start before the pandemic. Our expenditures have been focused on what we would describe as critical priorities: protecting public health, supporting hospitals, nursing facilities, and long-term care providers, obtaining and stockpiling and distributing PPE, promoting housing stability, encouraging economic development, and providing resources and support to local governments and local schools so that students can return to the classroom. This response has clearly been historic, but it has been very much supported by our colleagues at the federal level, including the work that was done by Chairman Neal and his team, and we appreciate their effort here in the Commonwealth. And with this funding, we managed to expand our testing and vaccine infrastructure, provide rental assistance for people who are facing evictions, and we had over $1 billion that flowed through the Commonwealth to local communities to support schools. We've also used this funding to provide over $56 million to address food insecurity, and the federal government has put significant resources into food insecurity over the course of the past year as well. And this is in addition to the billions of dollars the states received to help people dealing with unemployment. Another $38.5 billion has been provided directly to businesses, nonprofits, and individuals in the form of the Paycheck Protection Program loans, stimulus checks, and relief for providers and small businesses. We've also focused on supporting our partners at the local level, as we know they are facing similar difficulties and challenges. And as part of this, we allocated over $500 million in funding to cities and towns to support their own COVID-19 relief efforts, and we worked with the legislature throughout last year to keep our state budget balanced and working for the people of Massachusetts, and at the same time found paths forward to make resources available to small businesses operating one of the largest, if not the largest, small business grant programs in the country. We are very lucky that over the course of the past 5 years, our colleagues in the legislature worked with us to establish a very significant increase in our stabilization fund, which is basically, at the start of the pandemic, was 3 times the value it was when we took office. And the availability of those resources, along with federal support, have made it possible for us to look out for our neighbors, to deliver on our program commitments, and to continue to invest in many of the areas that were so important as we worked our way through this pandemic. And as cities and states ramp up their vaccination recovery efforts, support from D.C. will continue to be a critical part of how we get from here to there. The feds can play a huge role with respect to vaccinations, testing, school reopenings for both K through 12 and higher education, food insecurity, housing, rental, energy, and water assistance, small business support, and support for states, local governments, and territorial governments as they do the hard work that's going to be associated with trying to rebuild their economies and especially deal with the dramatic changes that have taken place with respect to how and where people work since this pandemic began. And I can't understate how big a challenge that is going to be for everybody as we move through this pandemic and on into the future. The final thing I'll talk about is the fact that while we are at a critical point in our fight against this pandemic and against this virus, it's more important than ever that there be a predictable path forward for states and for local governments as we work to do the things we are going to need to do to rebuild our economy, deal with the consequences of the pandemic on many of our downtowns, and to find a path forward to make sure that all of our people here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are able to weather the final few months of this as people get vaccinated, and more importantly, are able to find a way forward back into the workforce, hopefully, and back into the life that they used to have before this all began last March.